Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lies We Left podcast. We are so excited. We've been talking about this day forever, but let me just get through our disclaimers. One, this can be triggering. It is for a mature audience, and we are not professionals. And here's the great part. We actually have a professional here today. I want to introduce Danielle West.
Hi, my name is Danielle West, and I am a trauma therapist and an EMDR consultant in training. I've been doing this for quite a while. I guess we were going to talk about what got me into this, and that's kind of an interesting story. When I was 18, I started to do an internship with a maxillofacial surgeon. I wanted to be a surgeon. And
You did?
I did.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that
Yes.
either.
I was very much into science, biology, all different kinds of anatomy things, and really got more involved into the genetic side of it. And then I ended up not pursuing that and going more into the genetic route and going into philosophy and law. So then I wanted to be a lawyer, and I took the LSAT to become a lawyer. And then that just wasn't the route that I was supposed to go either. Got into consulting with plastic surgery, and I know. But all of it goes
sounds
together.
like a lot of money.
All of it goes together. I was a consultant with plastic surgery, and all of these people would come in and they would want to feel better. And so they'd come in and be like, I got a divorce. Can I get a facelift? Somebody died. Can I get a tummy tuck? And I kept thinking to myself, I'm not feeling very ethical right now, selling you something that isn't going to make you happy.
Wow.
And so through all of this also, I was trying to uncover different things in my own family and my own kind of behavior and understanding that. So I was studying physics, metaphysics, and genetics, and trying to understand more of what creates happiness, what creates change. And I wanted to kind of figure that out for myself. And in this world, you're told what to do instead of a way of getting information and learning how to apply that information to yourself. So I, in a way, created an experiment within myself on what I could do to change different behaviors, looking at what family I came from, noticing that what I didn't want to pass down. And so I started to understand more about what trauma was and how the environmental factors have more of a implication on health than biological ones. And so I wanted to understand more about that. And so then I just kept delving more and more into all of these different kinds of topics, whether it be genetics, epigenetics, and then that switched me into physics and understanding quantum mechanics. So my brain just kept going and going and going to understand this. And then I realized that we as a society, we as humans have the power to heal ourselves. We have a mechanism within us that can facilitate the health of our bodies. And I noticed that the way that people were looking at mental health was more of a consumer market, whereas people were taking advantage of others to say, oh, this is going to get you better, when in fact it just creates more of a consumeristic atmosphere and dependency so that nobody's getting better.
Are you talking about talk therapy?
I'm not just talking about talk therapy. I'm talking about just the paradigm of mental health in and of itself. Talk therapy can be very beneficial, but it is not beneficial when we have people with severe trauma, and that goes all the way to dissociation. And so I was looking at different modalities on what could be beneficial for that, and I fell upon the modality called EMDR a number of years ago and noticed what it can do for people and just how it activates the mechanism within the body to heal itself. And I wanted to empower people to utilize modalities and different kinds of education to help heal themselves instead of relying on somebody else to tell them what they need, which is exactly, how people become brainwashed, how they're being used for other people's purposes. So my purpose is truly to empower people to heal themselves and become an unstoppable force with whatever mission or vision that they have with the gifts and talents that they have been born with.
How long have you been doing EMDR therapy?
I have been doing EMDR therapy professionally for about 6 years. Mm-hmm. So not when you look at the grand scheme of things, it's not extensively long. But again, when I do something, I do it entirely. So right when I was trained, I dove straight into training with professionals such as Dr. Knipe, who is a huge leader in the field, extensive advanced trainings in somatic disorders. And then I made sure that I had a mentor that could help me. Again, EMDR to me, if you look at any kind of modality, it's like an art. And if you want to get to know the art, you need to know the artist. So Francine Shapiro was the one who came up with EMDR in 1987. And she had a number of colleagues, and one of those colleagues is now my mentor.
Wow.
Cool. Mm-hmm. I feel like we as a society are very geared, maybe it's just us in the US, maybe it's not that. We're not preconditioned to think about things in a holistic term, and we're not preconditioned to think about things. We have one problem, we want one solution instead of maybe a multifaceted solution into getting to our root causes and issues. Maybe that's part of the issue, is we don't think in terms of that.
Yeah.
Which is where EMDR kind of comes in, is it's exploring things from different issues and getting into different things. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I would say that, in order to attempt and to feel like we're in control, we want to try to categorize something, because if we can categorize it, then we feel as though we can control the issue.
Right.
And so that's where, mental health has come in, created the diagnostic manual of disorder. And now that we have this disorder, now we can control it. The problem is that when they came to write it out and do all of their research, they never once used trauma as a variable. So they threw that out the complete window. So in my professional opinion, I'm very leery of the DSM. Do we need a way to characterize these things? Absolutely. But our current model is flawed. Just too much. They look at the genome. The Human Genome Project started in the 80s and 90s, and they wanted to understand what genes control different behaviors, different kinds of physical ailments. But what they didn't realize is that genes require an environment for its purpose. And so if we're not looking at the environment, we're not looking at the epigenetic makeup around the genes that change the switchboard. That's what I loved so much about genes, is that I could see, you can turn this gene on and off and different times in their life and all of these different things. The DSM did not account for that. And so, for instance, the diagnosis of schizophrenia mathematically in the DSM should be gone in 4 generations. So is it genetic?
Ooh, wow, that's powerful. Like, wow.
Can you real quick explain the difference in like layman's terms, epigenetics and genetics?
Absolutely.
Because I know it's more complicated than I'm sure what you're going to say.
I really appreciate you reminding me that. Sometimes I speak and I forget the words I'm
for
using.
the people who are listening who might not know what that is.
Sure. So the way that I like to think of it is I like to think of genetics as a piano. So a piano has, a certain amount of keys, and no matter what piano you use, a concert, we're going to talk about concert piano because, of course, there's other pianos with different keys, but every piano has a certain amount of keys. Every person has a certain amount of genes, okay, unless there's a different type of disorder like Turner disorder or whatnot, but I'm not going there. We have the genes. Does the piano itself, does it dictate what it's playing just in and of itself? It can't play squat, right? It requires a player. I think of the piano player, as epigenetics. It depends on who's playing the genes, on how it's going to be expressed.
That is a good analogy. That is a good one.
And so when we want to change the expression of the genes, we just need to kind of either change the player or teach the player new ways of playing.
Ashley. Ashley's like over there floored.
But there's people, I'm sure, that come to you, and in your early career, there's people, you're at a plastic surgeon's, fix me, fix my face, that will make me feel better about myself, that will fix. And on the inside, something is triggering you going, there's something deeper here.
Absolutely.
There's something much deeper
Absolutely.
here. There's a bigger underlying issue, but I don't think people, either it scares them. I think people are nervous about approaching that issue.
Well, we seek to fix, right?
Yeah.
As a human species, we seek to survive, we seek to fix, but we can only do with what we know.
Yeah.
And the thing is in the educational systems and everything, we're not teaching people how to deal with grief, how to deal with these different types of traumas. Yes. We're just throwing out, hey, here's a vape. Here is Prozac. Here is, sex. Here are all of these different type of food, right? Yeah. All different kinds of things. In the supermarket of what can make me better, I, as a person selling it, is going to try to sell it because they're not in the business of helping us get better. There's no money in that they see right now. They see in what can I do to create more wealth for myself.
Can you, I guess for the audience listening, can you define trauma and talk about that?
So defining trauma, quite frankly, is as difficult as defining what human life is. Okay, because a lot of it is philosophical. A lot of it is going to be subjective on the individual as well as what's going on. So what I like to think of trauma is I like to think of as a moral dilemma, something that can't change. Okay, but what the DSM and different things say, trauma is a complex interaction of external events, so stuff on the outside of organisms and their response to them. So whether it's an experience, it's witnessing something, it's being confronted with events that are threatening either your life, self-injury, or threat to physical integrity of self. Okay, so that's exceptionally broad. And I think the biggest issue is that it's dependent not only on what's happening on the outside of the individual, but how the organism is able to metabolize what's going on. So it's going to be based on trauma dose. So how much of it is happening? When is it happening? Who is it happening to? What is the age of the individual? A lot of times they categorize it as mental, physical, and sexual. I would like to look at it as mental, physical, and spiritual, okay? Because we're hitting people on different types of levels on all different things, and it creates this type of response. So based on the amount of trauma we have is going to be based upon the mechanism of our body's ability to dissociate. So we're going to have this mechanism that causes us, and when I say dissociate, that's a clinical term. Let's switch it to disconnect, okay? So when we have something that is traumatizing to us, creating fear, creating the sense of survival, then our body is going to say, this is dangerous. In order for us to survive, we must disconnect. And when we dissociate or disconnect, there are many different ways that people do that. And that can categorize into different ways of looking at disorder, dysfunction, addiction, all different types of things. So when I think of dissociation, I again think of disconnection, but how? When I look at different clients, it's, well, are they more focused on, do they more feel what is called depersonalized? Okay, so when somebody that's dissociating is experiencing more depersonalized symptoms, then they're going to feel detached, like they're not in their body. Like, what's going on? This isn't me. I don't know what's going on. They'll look in the mirror and just say, something's off. Like, this isn't me. What's going on? Another part of dissociation is derealization. So feeling as though something is not real around you and not believing it is real and acting in a different way. Another thing is amnesia. Okay, again, these things can be so traumatic that if we were to have a memory be completely consolidated, our nervous system would fry. And so our brain literally takes the components of memory and separates them out so that we cannot bring it to memory in the moment, because we have to survive in the environment that we're in. That becomes more of a priority. Fugue, is another one where people will all of a sudden wake up and they're in a different location, or they're wearing different clothes, or they don't know who there is around them. It's just literally, it's a different part of our brain operating. That's all it really is. It's, oh my gosh, this part of my brain is operating and I don't know what's going on. I got into phantom limbs for a while when I was trying to understand this stuff, and it's really fascinating how the brain works. Another one is identity confusion. So people will feel like they're two different people, or they'll operate like two different people. So for instance, if you're living in Colorado and you're snowboarding, there might be one day that you're rocking it down the mountain, okay? And then there might be another day that you just can't even get down the bunny slope. Other people, when they have identity confusion, might show up and be all peppy and ready to go. And then the next day they're feeling emo with the hood on their head and in the corner, not talking to anybody. Another thing that people use with dissociation is absorption. Absorbed so much into something that you can't see what's going on around you. We see that a lot with television these days. Back in the day, it was more like books. So all different kinds of ways that dissociation is manifested, but it's the exact same thing. So the treatment can be used to help different individuals, just even if it's manifesting in a different way.
When you say all that, I'm just like, man, there's so much that I still do as far as dissociation.
Well, everybody
goes.
really dissociates at some level, okay? Like if you think about a hunter, when a hunter is trying to be quiet, not to make the deer run away, he kind of has to freeze up, and if he has to sneeze, he kind of has to shove the sneeze down, okay? There's different types of dissociation that people do each day. But the issue is what is that doing to our quality of life? Okay, a thing in plastic surgery was, do you want the quantity of it or the quality of it to change? So understanding what you want in life and having that vision, that mission, then you're able to look at everything else that's going on and understand what you want to change to get you to where you want to go.
So all the things that you just talked about as far as disassociating, is that under the umbrella of dissociative identity disorder, or is that different?
It is under the umbrella, but it is also under the umbrella of dissociation, because when I look at mental health, a lot of what I look at is it as a spectrum. Okay, so when I look at generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, complex PTSD ID, I'm looking at it as a spectrum. I'm not looking at it as boxes of this is a diagnosis, this is a diagnosis, this is a diagnosis. I'm looking at it as a spectrum, as a trauma dose. And based upon where we are on the spectrum is going to figure out what's going on with dissociation. But again, everybody is going to have dissociation on different levels, different disconnection based on the trauma they had, as well as the physiology of the body.
So, based off of what you're saying, do you think that, like, if you had to guess, how many people have dissociation or
Sure.
dissociative identity disorder?
So, current numbers, what it's actually looking like is that it's exceptionally higher than we thought. And what we're kind of guesstimating is that about 9% of the population has DID, which is almost the same amount as alcoholism.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. So it's very high.
So when...
And it's growing. That's what stinks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with dissociation identity disorder, what is something that you, like, when people are first, I mean, I know you say you don't, like, you look at a spectrum, but there is kind of this diagnoses, right?
Absolutely. When you
Within
get to a
this
certain
spectrum,
kind of spectrum.
Yeah. So when a person is identified as, or they have this diagnosis, what is their steps, like is this, like, when I was diagnosed with this, there was a lot of shame involved. I was like angry because I was confused, because I thought, oh, I'm just crazy. There's I almost looked at it like multiple personality disorder,
which is the same thing. It's just a different name. So in 1994, the name changed from multiple personality disorder to dissociative identity disorder. So it's the same type of thing, but again, and that's a lot of people don't want to give their clients the diagnosis for that very reason. Okay. But there's an instrumental reason for that shame, because if I can feel responsible, then I can be in control. And if I'm in control, then I'm going to survive. But when I do that, then I'm not able to get to those hard emotions of the helplessness that was really happening, was really going on, that is actually really structuring my mind and the subconscious program that I'm trying to get to listen to me now and to change.
So can you give examples of maybe I don't want to say a client, but just a case study of like a person who had DID, and like what was the earliest age of this part of them? Because that's what you call it, right? It's a part of them.
Well, Richard Schwartz would say that everybody's multiple. Okay. So, and that's something that I think really needs to be brought into the mental health, because when we understand we're multiple, we can actually have more control over, well, okay, I'm multiple. What does this look like? What is this part? How can I speak with it? That's where our power comes in. Okay. Case study. So it's difficult to look at it completely from childhood up sometimes, because a lot of times when you get a client with DID, they can't necessarily remember their childhood, but there can be clues. So I've had people that have clues. So what they'll look at is when they were younger, they were a bully, or they noticed that they might have played sexual games with somebody. Another one is that they noticed that their handwriting was changing. Grades were slipping. So for instance, like from August to December, they would have good grades, and then from January to May, they would be failing. Okay. They have multiple different kinds of substance abuse. They're maybe doing eating disorder. So a lot of it is just, are they trying to gain control? What's going on? Then a client tried everything. So for instance, they were 13, they were smoking weed, then they went to meth, then they tried bulimia, then they started having sex, then they started crying during sex, they didn't know why, and then they got a little bit older, they started running into people that said that they knew them, but they were like, I don't know you. They would go to parties, not remember what would happen. People would not want to be their friends. They got to the point where they would just stop asking what happened because they didn't want to know. So and then not being able to change. I think that's a big thing with people with dissociation, is that they feel helpless. They've tried everything. Nothing is working.
And I think this is a good segue. In your professional opinion, what are like some signs and symptoms of like DID?
So kind of just what I was saying. So trying multiple substances, different kinds of sexual behaviors, not having memory for special events in your life. There is a dissociation experiences scale that you can find in a PDF form online. And you can literally just score it yourself if you'd like to. And if it goes pretty high, then that would be the time that I'd say, hey, why don't you go see a professional that can give you a more diagnostic thing. But again, there's so many different ways of figuring out. Sometimes you don't know, and it's based on medication. So with some of my clients, they were given, 8, 9 different medications. Well, first of all, that's a fallacy. There's no research on doing any of that. And there's actually... mathematically, you can't even have more than one diagnosis at a time. It just doesn't fit it at all. So it's really interesting. So there's multiple different ways of noticing. Just if they've had lots of different diagnoses, that's going to tell me something. If they're on multiple medications, then that's going to tell me something. If they can't remember their childhood, that's going to tell me something.
So mathematically, you can't have anxiety and depression?
You can have those two. So I can't remember the exact math with those two, but the amount of it okay, so let me think if I can think about the math. So if you had, when we go into the mental hospital, if somebody came in and they presented to me saying that they were having, they kept having thoughts of wanting to kill themselves. They were using meth, they were using alcohol, they were depressed, and so I might diagnose them with alcoholism, meth, substance abuse, schizoaffective disorder because they have some type of delusion, and major depressive disorder. I think that the math for that would be about 1 or 2% of the population of the whole world. And so mathematically, those things don't work. But in the clinical terms, we're diagnosing people with 4 or 5 different things daily.
Oh, you're saying what they're dealing with at that moment. Is that what you're saying?
Not at the moment, just
Okay.
Diagnostically. When we try to put more than one diagnosis together, the numbers don't match to what's being put out. So, for instance, Prozac came out in the 80s, and depression was low. It went up, I think, 12 times as high when Prozac came out.
Really?
Instead of, you would think that when Prozac came in, that it would drop. And so these diagnoses, the way that we're trying to conceptualize them, it's not working. It's not helping the people.
Right. Throwing pills at
And
issues.
I noticed that in the foster care system, a lot of these kids have, I kid you not, 5, 6 diagnoses. And you're like,
How?
what is this doing? How?
Mhm.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like none of it makes sense being on not 20 medications, but a good amount of medications. And you're like, this kid's like 12.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how is that?
In my professional opinion, I don't find it to be ethical at all. And that's why, again, that I'm an advocate for a mental health paradigm shift so that we can actually help these individuals instead of creating dependency and creating more problems. When we give children these Ritalin, for instance, at a young age, it's going to create more problems and more dependency the older they get. And we know that for research, but yet we're still doing it. So what are we doing?
So, how does EMDR help with dissociation?
Well, EMDR, so let me go back to with what trauma does. So trauma, we have this thing within ourselves called the adaptive information processing model. And what that means is that we have memories and they're stored by association. So if I say the word tree, what comes to your mind right now?
Being with my sisters in New Hampshire.
Okay. Is there a specific picture of a tree in your mind in New Hampshire?
I did a meditative session. I actually abandoned them. They were on a trail, and I started having a panic attack. And I was like, guys, keep going. You're going to do great. I'm sitting right on this rock, and I'm going to work through this. And so I sat on the rock, and I looked up at the sky, and there was the aspen trees blowing in the wind, and I started sobbing. And I just had the most amazing time. It was great. That's what I think of.
Wow. And what do you think of when I say the word tree? What picture comes to mind?
There was a tree that we had growing up. We lived on Elm Street, and it was this huge tree in the front of the house that we rented from. It was bent, and you could climb up on it, but there were elephant ears that grew up around it. Yeah.
Okay.
For me, are 4 grapefruit trees that we had in Houston.
I think of the sorry. I think of the tree in our neighborhood growing up in Georgetown. I think of that tree with the huge tire swing.
Oh, yeah.
I think of that in this one branch that I would grab onto and try to climb up with my monkey feet and get inside of it.
Wow. So exactly, is your tree more real than your tree?
No.
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 I
Oh,
mean, mine
maybe.
had a lot of grapefruit on it, so.
So and this is an illustration of association, okay? So words are built on association. All knowledge is built on association. And so we can think of a tree, but the way in which we think of a tree can be completely different from somebody that's right next to us. Okay, so this is kind of the adaptive information processing model, what it is trying to talk about. Memory networks are the basis of pathology and health. So high arousal memories result in inadequate processing, and they're maladaptively stored. So when our memories are stored the way that our body was meant to store them, for instance, my memory of being on the podcast isn't traumatic, so I'll be able to bring all the senses, all of the thoughts, all the emotions, all the body sensations and beliefs together. But when we have high arousal situations, in order for our body to disconnect, it disconnects all of the things that go with that memory so that we can be in that fight or flight state that we have to be in for survival. So it kicks off our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is what is in charge of metabolizing all of these information, okay? And so when we have high arousal occur with the nervous system, our brain can't store these memories accurately. So we're left with things like body memories, like, I don't know why I'm anxious right now. I'm just anxious. Well, what's the point of anxiety? We have different emotions to let us know what's going on in the environment around us so that we can interpret it and know how to react. Okay, but if we have something that's inadequately stored, then it's information that isn't going to give us an adequate description of what's going on in reality. So information from the present situation can unconsciously link to negative experiences in the past, and these similarities can act as triggers to react in the present as if we were in a different situation in the past. So reprocessing starts to take place when we have dual attention on a past memory combined with some type of bilateral stimulation, which is what EMDR does, to activate the process that allows us to make the connections. So what we have to do is, in order for us to adequately store these memories, we have to bring down our arousal enough for our brain to metabolize it, bring it all together, and rationally notice it's not happening anymore. We don't need it. See, because our body stores information in a different way. It has a different law than our law of the mind. So our body stores things, just like when we have the flu, it's going to store part of it because it wants to create antibodies just in case it happens again, right? But our body isn't telling time. It's not thinking of, oh, I'm going to catch the flu next year or anything. It doesn't matter, though, because the flu doesn't change. Well, it does, but you get what I'm saying, all right? When we have trauma, our body does the same thing. It stores it. It says, oh my gosh, if this happens again, I need to know how to do this. But again, our body doesn't know time. And so if something horrible happened to us at 1 or 2, it's storing all of the energy, all of the beliefs necessary for that 1 or 2-year-old to survive. Well, I'm 40. I'm different than I was when I was 1 or 2. I'm stronger. If somebody was to try that with me again, I'd be a force to be reckoned with. But our body doesn't understand that. And so EMDR brings it back and allows our body to metabolize it, allows those thoughts to come to mind, and lets us know, hey, we're safe now. You can let that go. And in fact, letting it go will allow your mind to think clearer. And when our mind thinks clearer, that's when we're going to be able to survive at our best.
So, like, listening to that, I think of almost like habits that, like, I personally do. And I think I know it's because my body is still stuck in that time of something bad happening. And so you have to try to ignore it. But you don't, like, for me, let's say, what's something that I do? I'll retreat. I'll retreat. If there's confrontation, I'll retreat. Not all the time, because sometimes I can be pretty combative, but I'll retreat. And it's because when I was younger, that's all I could do.
Right.
Eat, I either had to stand there and listen to verbal lashings and dissociate in my mind. So now as an adult, if I'm in an argument with my husband, if I can't go and retreat, I retreat in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
He can be talking to me, telling me this makes me upset, that makes me upset, and I'm there physically, but mentally I'm looking at the window and I'm just like, oh, I could be decorating those curtains, or I'm trying to, like, I use that tactic of either not being present mentally or fleeing the situation. I still do that.
And habits are nothing more than behaviors from our paradigms of the past. See, when we are younger, we have to take on different paradigms for survival. But we have to get to those paradigms for the behavior to change. A lot of people just want to change the behavior and then hope that the behavior changes. But we have to go to the source of where the behavior is coming from. And what's nice about EMDR is that it allows us to go back to those old paradigms by breaking down the dissociative barrier. But that's really dangerous for people with DID as well as the clinician working with them if they don't have the adequate information. Dissociation is for survival. It keeps the individual safe. And so you have to be around somebody that understands this and isn't going to break the barrier too fast.
Yeah, because I remember you gave an analogy, like, because I just wanted to get everything out. Okay, just, that idea that athletes have, no pain, no gain, or the idea that a lot of us have, if it's not causing pain, then we're not doing something good to our bodies. Because, soreness in the muscle can lead to muscle growth.
Yeah, it's good pain. I love this. Yeah.
And so I'm just like, let's just get all this shit out now. And so many times you're like, no, we're not going to do that, because think of it like a closet, and just, all right, well, you have this closet full of stuff. And what are we going to do if we're just going to keep taking all the stuff out? Where are you going to put this stuff? You have no other closets right now. It's a one closet bedroom.
This is a good segue. Danny, can you talk more about, because I think we've tried to explain this on previous episodes, but I think for the sake of us not being professionals and you being a professional, can you talk more about the parts associated with DID? Because that, I think, is maybe sometimes one of the hardest parts to kind of grasp onto.
Absolutely. So I like to think of them as kind of flavors. Now, there's going to be a spectrum of different types of parts of self based on what type of DID that we're dealing with, okay? Because there's organic DID and then there's non-organic DID.
Can you explain that real quick?
Sure. So there is dissociative identity disorder that's created from an environment organically, for instance, like incest. And then there's non-organic dissociative identity disorder that's created by organizations for their own gain.
Ooh, so like sex trafficking?
Keep going. It's higher than that.
Government?
But yes. Keep going.
Programs?
Keep going.
Churches?
Keep going. Okay. It's all there.
Wow. So you're saying that there's a perpetrator almost with the non-organic?
So there's typically, when we look at different flavors of parts, there's going to be, and we can look at the internal family systems model, that's going to give us the exile part, which is also sometimes thought of as a victim part. There's going to be a part called a firefighter or a rescuer part. That's going to be a part that's trying to keep the exile safe. Or regulated. So that might be a part that takes on a different addiction. It's a self-loving thing. And then there's going to be another part called a manager, or some people will think of it as a protector or a persecutor. So a part that has to manage everything else. So think of it as the manager is saying, you can't do it. And the rescuer is like, oh no, okay, we'll drink a couple beers and then we can. And then the exile's okay. We don't have to go there. We don't have to go to the sadness of why we can't, because we have everything else taken care of. And so there's different ways of navigating around that. So if we want to work with somebody that has dissociative identity disorder, we need to have an alliance with the manager and the firefighters before we can even go towards the exile, because it's going to cause abreachments. It's going to cause relapse. It's going to cause different types of things. So we need to make sure that we're combating those two parts before we go deeper.
The exiler, is that what you said?
The exile or the victim.
And could you describe the exile?
Sure. So that would be the one that had to go through abuse.
So in essence, they're the ones that have this source of pain almost?
Correct. They might be pain holders. They might actually hold the memory of incest or something else.
Okay. So
sadness, think of sadness. So when we have dissociation, a lot of times it breaks off our neural network. So we have these things called affect circuits that allow us to know what emotions are. And those develop, okay? And then they develop, and then we're able to have social engagements with people. And when that develops, then we can start to think of things that are not as concrete. So more mindfulness, more abstract things. So when we have DID, it can separate to where all sadness goes into this compartment. So you might have somebody that, I'd never cry. I'm never sad. Well, it's not that you don't cry or you're not sad. It's that whenever you're in the place of sadness, it goes compartmentally to a different place. And so a lot of times the exiles will hold a lot of that sadness, a lot of the terror, the annihilation that really was experienced during the trauma. And again, if we were to experience those emotions, our body thinks that it would shut down, because that's exactly what would have happened back then.
Which is why I think so many people are afraid to do therapy in the beginning, is that they're afraid of that brokenness.
Well, I'd be afraid of what my emotion was too. You know, I've had therapists where a person is on the couch, but they don't understand how to explain what they're feeling. And then all of a sudden they feel like they're leaving their body. Well, I wouldn't want to go back to a place where I constantly feel like I'm leaving my body and nothing's being done for it.
Right. Exactly.
So there was can you say the names of the types of parts again?
Absolutely. So there's the manager,
Okay.
the firefighter, and the exile.
Okay. What role have you seen like these different parts play in individuals?
So a manager part I can see as somebody that's constantly in their mind, they feel like they're being told how horrible that they are, that they're a piece of shit. Then a firefighter part I would think of as somebody who is maybe cutting or using alcohol at night to go to sleep. And then the exile part can be this uncontrollable just sadness that shows up, and it just, there's nothing that you can do about it. It just keeps showing up. Why are you crying? I don't know. I'm just waking up and I'm crying. I'm sad.
It makes me think that we don't understand ourselves nearly as well as we need to.
And that's what I want to help with.
Yeah.
You know, the more knowledge is power. And the thing is the people that have this knowledge have been using it against us. Why don't we take some of what they have taken and use it for us? Just like the little girl, I forgot her first name, but her last name was Gila. And she was going through a disorder, and they just started using her cells and coming up with all these different technologies and research to understand what the Gila cell does. But they used it to their own end. And now they have different laboratories. Now they make money. Now they do all of these things. Well, how can we use that same information to help us? There have been people that have been doing mind control activities for a very long time. Very long time. And they're using all of that power to control us. Well, we can take some of what they have grabbed from their experiments on victims, and we can use that to help us take our power back.
What happens when you do EMDR and you start identifying your parts and you start connecting with them?
I mean, lots of different things. That's a hard thing to answer because there's so many different types of systems. And so it just depends. There's different things that happen. So there is just orienting a part to today. So if somebody is completely DID, then there are parts of the mind that don't even realize it's 2022. And so we orient that part to the present. Then we do co-consciousness. So noticing there's more than one part of me. What do you guys think about that? And then understanding what that looks like, navigating, working on negotiations together. So when I have treatment for individuals with this, we really want to work on rapport. And that's not just with me and the client, but that's with the client and the parts of self. What kind of exercises are we doing to just feel comfortable with one another?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be, and when you say EMDR, I think that we need to be careful with that because the mainstream EMDR model that's taught in training is not the same way that you utilize it with people with dissociative identity disorder.
I did not know that, considering that's the only type of EMDR therapy that I've had.
Well, there's different types of techniques that you use with the bilateral stimulation, but the type in which they train you, that's just the basics. It's kind of like going to art class and learning how to sketch with a pencil and a pad. Again, EMDR is an art, so we've got to go down, we've got to do advanced, we've got to learn different, mediums. Exactly, mediums. We have to understand those different things to go with that. But EMDR is a 8-step protocol, and so the different types of protocols where you're at in it is going to be based on what kind of parts work that we're doing.
What's the protocols? Do you know? Like offhand?
That sounds like a long discussion.
Well, is it like 8 steps, like take step 1 and then you can get to step 2? Is it step 2 and then you can get and then 8 you're healed? Or is it something that I don't know. Maybe. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a long question or a long answer.
It does sound like it.
I guess I'm more, is it the steps to healing or is it the step for the provider?
It's the steps that the providers
gotcha.
go through.
Okay, all right.
So it's not necessarily like
I was like,
the client
did I get to that 8 steps? Because I don't know if I did.
No. So my question is, because the biggest question we get is our listeners will message us, how do we even begin to find an EMDR therapist? Mm-hmm. So, because I know in the field there are a lot of bad therapists, people who are evil and who have used it for their advantage to plant false memories and so forth. So how can we help our listeners find a good EMDR therapist when they don't know what to look for?
So the first thing I want to say is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, okay? There are, people out there that might not have good treatment models, but that doesn't mean that we're all bad. So what I would say is, first of all, if you find that EMDR is a modality that would benefit you, I would first make sure that I'm going to emdria.org to find somebody that is certified. Training is not going to be suffice. EMDRIA.org.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. So that's going to be EMDR certified clinicians that you're going to want, at least at a bare minimum. As much, when you have an interview with a therapist, what questions are you asking them? What trainings have they been in? What kind of populations do they see? Why do they like that population? Have them tell you a little about themselves. As therapists, we're told not to talk about ourselves very much. But if I was going to hire a baseball coach for my child, I would want to know what this baseball coach knows, why they're doing it, and hey, have they played the game? Because that's a big thing too, is you have to understand the flavor in order to treat, and you either do it for a very long, extensive time, or you've had a lot of experiential knowledge within this type of population.
What is the consequence, in your opinion, of holding on to trauma?
Well, I think the ACE study shows us exactly what that is. And the ACE study was
Adverse childhood experiences.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So it was on 17,000 adults, right? And the relationship between abuse and risk factors for death. And what they found was that there was 50 different types of diseases correlated with these traumas. And so from the AIP model and EMDR, what we see is that trauma creates dis-ease, literally. It creates anxiety, it creates depression, because what it does is trauma doesn't allow your nervous system to be in homeostasis. So you have what is called the autonomic nervous system. You have the sympathetic part, which is in charge of fight or flight, and then you have the parasympathetic part that's in charge of freeze. Okay? And so when those two things are out of whack, then it's going to create different types of chemicals in your body that aren't going to be in homeostasis either. So you're going to have too much cortisol. Well, guess what? You're probably going to have adrenal fatigue. And then you're going to start going down to things like Crohn's and Hashimoto's. And from my professional opinion, those are not genetic at all. Those are exacerbated things that are going on in our body. And again, if we had more idea of how to control those, then they could dissipate. And that's what I see in EMDR. You know, we have seen with people that I have consulted with, there's been an individual that the cancer has gone away. There were cysts on ovaries that went away. There was an individual that was wheelchair bound that started walking. So quite honestly, possibilities are endless. I don't know what they are, but I know that as more that we go into fixing our brain, then why can't we fix our body? That's what our brain does. The thing is that we've created these individuals that aren't reliant on their brain. They're nervous. Oh no, something's wrong. So they go to the doctor. The doctor gives them the pills, which takes the power away from the brain.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's deep.
So, like, you mentioned the pills. What, for a person who's on, like, antidepressants, anti-anxiety, and I know you can't give medical advice for someone that you don't know, someone that you haven't seen or anything like that.
Nor can I give medical advice because I have not been to a medical school.
I mean, you were studying plastic surgery or something like that. No.
I have extensive knowledge, but per government regulations, I am not inclined to be able to talk about those things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I got off my anti-anxiety medication only because I changed my enviment. Right now, I'm on FMLA for my job, and I stopped having to take my anxiety medication because I wasn't constantly anxious about something.
It's fabulous.
Yeah, so it's almost like you change your environment, you change what's going on in your brain, and your body just knows what to do.
Exactly. When did we start not trusting our body?
That's so empowering. That's so empowering that each individual person holds the key to heal themselves. And people live constantly without that power, and I don't understand that. I want more for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now I just got to get off of my insomnia medication. I got to figure that out.
Well, and that can be with figuring out what type of part, right? When we learn how to talk to our parts of self, then we can make the changes. And that's something that I understood when I started studying phantom limb syndrome. When we have something that's cut off from us, then that part of our brain starts to grow more. And when we can learn to talk to those parts, then we can change the different things that are going on. And that's potential energy. That's physics. That's knowledge.
So I most recently discovered, thanks to Brooke, that I actually have a part from Dad's death. I did not realize it, but ever since I identified that part and I've started talking to that part, like I don't know how to explain it. I'm serious. Like I just feel more like connected within myself and more whole.
When I can't figure out what's going on with me, I will literally, Brooke and all the other parts of Brooke, and I just go through like, you're safe, you're protected, you're loved. And I just talk to them. And
That's
I just wait and listen to what they tell me. And 9 times out of 10, it works.
Absolutely.
Because
It's trying to figure out the
yeah.
need. It's what they've been trying to do so long is overcompensate for the needs they never got.
Yeah.
And so if we can figure out what need it is that they're missing and allow them to see that it is for them today, then that is healing. That is reorienting. That is allowing this part of our brain back online, which is going to create the neurotransmitters that we need to sleep, that we need to feel better. And it becomes this huge ripple effect.
I even started blessing my parts, telling them what they needed that they didn't get.
Well, and what if you knew that if you talked to your parts at certain times of the day, that it would be more apt to listening?
Oh, that's
And when you first wake up in the morning for the first 20 minutes, your brain cycles are going at 10.5 cycles per second, which
I
means
love
that
you know that. That's hilarious.
I'm full of very useless information. But when we know that, I kind of like to think of Star Trek, when I think of going to different dimensions, because we're going to different dimensional planes as well as not just neurological. Like we really have to take physics into this. And when we are able to bring up the first 20 minutes of when we wake up, we can think of what would help talk to the paradigms of the past, because they're going to be easily penetrable. Just like, again, in Star Trek, when I want to go to a different, beam me up, Scotty? When I want to do that, like I'm thinking, oh, well, all of these different things are going really fast. So I can gauge it. It's not so much a wall, it's more of a curtain. And so I encourage people to listen to affirmations in the morning. Passive positivity is what I like to call it. What do I have passively positive that I can put into my life in the morning that can speak to my old paradigms of the past so I can have a better day?
Wow. I was telling the girls about this. Have you heard of Shad Helmsetter? He's a psychologist who does self-talk.
Nice.
And he does programs. And I've been telling the girls, I have this app where it gives you affirmations, and I play those while I'm working.
Yes.
And it literally changes my focus about how I do my job, because I'm able to do it while I'm listening. And you don't even have to be concentrating. You just have to hear the messages in the back of your mind. And it's the whole concept behind it is to remap your brain.
Yes.
Your brain remaps itself with those positive messages. It's amazing.
And that's actually how our brain was created in the first place. Is that what I noticed with studying neurobiology and EMDR, is that our brain operates off of I am worthy, I am competent, and I am loved. And that creates the homeostasis between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And so when we can talk that line of code back into our mind, then it's going to create the programs that we want to fulfill what we're doing today. And people like that have created these programs to empower the people, because it's the people that have learned the programming a long time ago that have been using it against us. So we're taking that knowledge back and we're empowering others to do that for themselves.
That's very interesting that you say that, because I think of how helpless an infant is.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not, an infant isn't a blank slate, but kind of almost in the sense of their caregiver, they respond to their caregiver, to their who is supposed to be a nurturer.
Correct.
And the messages that nurturer, that caregiver is sending them. And so it's almost like we have to, as adults, go back to those original messages that was given to us.
Exactly.
And work, like, what am I trying to say? I don't know, just like make it to where we don't believe that anymore. If we were told we weren't worthy, we
have to give them the knowledge that they're missing, or where they were attempting to get their identity, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't understand object permanence or anything at those different ages. And that's why they're so impressionable and they become victims of other things also.
Because if we grew up with an angry father, an angry mother, an anxious father, an anxious mother, then we've taken on those messages.
Correct.
Danny, there are a lot of, at least from my research that I've done, there's a lot of like negative stigmas against DID. What if somebody is listening to this today, and if they feel that this matches, kind of with how they had been feeling and things that they've been dealing with, what do you suggest for them as far as like looking into this for themselves, or resources, or people? Like what would you suggest to somebody? Because especially I think we have people listening like all over the US too. So I mean, I'm not familiar with really resources outside of the state of Texas, but I'm just curious what people can do if they feel that a lot of this applies to them. Like what would be their first step, I guess?
The first step, I would say, would be going to emdr.org, reading more about it, going to places that are going to give them the information that is going to show them there's something to look into. I think the one thing not to do is to think, oh, I must be crazy. Because if I think that, then I'm allowing somebody else to control me. Instead of thinking that, why don't I honor the feelings I'm having and investigate those feelings? And I can suspend my belief. You know, I have a lot of clients, I'm like, let's just suspend belief for a second and allow the information out. And once the information out, just like discovery in a court case, then we can make those types of conclusions.
Like that. Thank you so much, Danny, for being here. We're going to cut this one off here and then go into a second episode, because you are just too precious to just have you on one episode. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to the Lies We Love podcast.